Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. There he is, thought the furious young raven-haired boy with the bright green eyes. That's the arsewipe responsible for dumping me on the Dursleys. He was walking last in line, alone, of about 40 children roughly the same age as he. They walked up between two long tables, with children of various ages, from 11 to 17. Sitting to his left were children wearing robes trimmed in yellow and black. To his right, their robes were trimmed in blue and bronze. The tables were covered in flatware and crockery that appeared to be made of gold. Above, hanging suspended in the air, were hundreds of candles. Their light filled the room with a soft but all-encompassing warm glow. The children ahead of him were looking around, uttering sounds of awe and whispering to each other about what they saw. One young bushy brown-haired lass just ahead of him was talking to a blonde-haired lass about how the ceiling was supposed to be charmed to show the night sky. The raven-haired boy was only paying attention to it all, almost peripherally. Almost his entire focus was on the man wearing garish robes and a long white beard, sitting on what looked like a golden throne. He knew who the man was, who he had to be, Albus Arsewipe Dumbledore, the one who sentenced him to almost 10 years of hell. McGonagall, a tall, stern-looking woman with the epitome of a witch's hat perched on her head, told the group of children he was with to form a line in front of the small stage she had just mounted. He recognized her too, just as he did the giant of a man who collected them from the train station. The boy paid her little mind. He could feel the constant headache he'd had since he was 7 years old beginning to intrude again. It always happened when his anger began to build, his rage. As always, he forced it back with an iron will, a coping mechanism he'd developed long ago. The Dursleys never allowed him any sort of painkiller, and as always, it made him feel within himself as if he was suffocating, like something was squeezing him deep inside. The boy watched as the hat, clearly demonstrating more magic in evidence, began to sing. The tune, though quite basic, allowed the hat to sing about how unlike other hats it was before it sang about the 4 houses of the school. Then it gave a short riff about putting it on to be sorted. Once it quietened again, the children around him and throughout the hall began to clap. The boy just wished they'd do so quietly. His headache was building along with his anger. He was struggling to force it back. McGonagall unfurled a scroll as she waited for the applause to die down. Once it had, she began to call names. The boy was trying to focus within himself while only listening with half an ear. From experience, he knew, if given time, he could force the anger away, and with it, the headache. He had his eyes closed, focusing. It helped that he didn't have to look upon the face of the old wanker on his throne, McGonagall, or that Hagrid bloke. He would bide his time. After all these years, he was able to quickly and methodically force the pain and anger down. It never went away completely, though. Not since that evening, the evening his so-called loving aunt hit him in the side of the head with a frying pan. The one that had slipped out of his sore and soapy hands as he stood on a low stool at the sink washing dishes. It had slipped out of his hands and hit the floor, making a racket. His aunt had stormed in, furious. She screamed at him about how they were trying to watch the evening news on the BBC. She'd bent down, grasped the handle of the pan from where it had landed on the floor, raised it, and hit him in the side of the head with it. The hit had knocked him unconscious, as the next thing he remembered was waking up back in his cupboard with a blinding headache. He was just glad it was late at night as the rest of the house was quiet. He couldn't see any lights on, filtering through the gaps in the door, but since that night he'd had the headaches. Shoving those thoughts aside, too, the boy was pulled out of his meditative state when he heard his name called. The way it was called sounded as if it wasn't the first time, either. He opened his eyes and saw the old witch, McGonagall, staring sternly at him. He could also hear whispering coming from the other children, the other students. He knew what they were whispering. The Harry Potter? The boy who lived? Is Harry Potter here? All nonsense. He hated them for it. He felt a hand of one of the other children, he didn't know who, nor did he care, give him a light nudge forward by his shoulder. He noticed the old arsewipe and some of the other teachers leaned forward slightly, as if in anticipation. Wankers. He walked forward, heading for the small wooden stool. McGonagall stood alongside it, ready to place the hat that could sing on his head. As he reached the stool and was about to turn around to sit on it, the scent hit him. That same scent he remembered from his memories. That same scent that was on her, one of the other people besides the whiskered arsewipe, responsible for him being dumped on the doorstep of the Dursleys. The perfume of the old witch brought the memory of that night back to his full consciousness. The sense of smell, the memory of smell, was one of the most powerful of mnemonics. Her perfume triggered the memory deep within the boy, Harry Potter. It also reawoke the anger the boy had been trying to suppress. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find two people who are less like us, and they've got this son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Harry stopped. He felt his hands clench into fists. Taking deep breaths of rage, he turned to the old witch and snarled, "No." Minerva McGonagall had never, in all her years at Hogwarts, heard a student refuse to be sorted in such a manner, and definitely not one who would do it with so much anger, so much venom. There had been others in the past, but that was due to the child's fear of the hat. However, young Mr. Potter was clearly unafraid. "Excuse me, Mr. Potter?" she asked the boy in shock. "I said no," replied young Harry. "I will not be sorted. I do not believe I shall be attending this school." "Mr. Potter," exclaimed McGonagall. "You must." "Bullshit, lady," Harry snarled back, louder than before. "About the only reason I came here was to meet face to face the assholes who dumped me as a baby on the doorstep of the people who spent the next near 10 years abusing me. Well, now I've seen them, and you disgust me." The entire hall was completely silent. Most faces appeared horrified by what they'd just heard, and the venom in the voice that had just delivered it. Harry then turned around and stormed off the platform, and through the remaining students waiting to be sorted. He stormed back down between the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw tables, heading back to the double doors he'd only recently entered. Suddenly, he stopped. He turned around to look back up towards the head table. He could see that the old fool had risen to his feet and was raising his wand. Thinking for a bare moment, Harry suddenly threw his robe off over his head and threw it onto the floor. Quickly, he turned to the Hufflepuff table, with those wearing ties of black and yellow. He stepped onto the bench seat between two students, who rapidly gave him room, and then up onto the tabletop. Once he was standing on the table, he started to remove his V-necked school jumper, tie and shirt. While doing so, he snarled out in a large voice, near shouting, "You people think me some kind of hero. I'm supposed to be some great boy who lived, the one who supposedly defeated Voldemort. Well, down to his shirt, no undershirt, he ripped it off and threw it, too, to the floor, leaving himself bare-chested. Then he threw his arms out wide and loudly snarled, 'Take a look at some of the evidence of how your supposed hero has been treated since that night. None of that bullshit your parents and guardians probably read to you as bedtime stories.' He started to turn in a slow circle so that everyone in the hall could see the scars from some of the injuries he sustained. And these are only the visible ones. These are only the ones that didn't heal properly. Harry didn't hear the gasps, the sudden exclamations of horror, or the crying from some of the students as they looked upon him. He couldn't really hear anything. His head was throbbing. The pain was excruciating. He mentally bit down on the pain through force of will as he ranted. He didn't see the little red-headed girl that was sitting near the head of the Hufflepuff table, Susan, stand up with tears in her eyes and bolt out of the room. He didn't see her because the pain had brought tears to his own eyes. The pressure, the feeling of suffocating began to feel like he was being choked, began to build to a level he'd not felt before. But he didn't care. He was finally able to vent his feelings to the people who caused him to be left with the Dursleys. His rage had been unleashed. "Is this how you believed your hero should be treated?" he screamed. Was it your intent for your hero to be beaten, whipped, fed nothing but table scraps, if I was lucky to get even that, treated like a slave while my fat uncle and whale of a cousin fed themselves to morbid obesity and tormented me? Well, and who was responsible for me being dumped in a house where I was abused for almost all of my life, you might ask? He screamed out. Jabbing a finger at the head table, he screamed, "It was none other than the so-called all-powerful Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Minerva McGonagall, and Rubeus Hagrid." Lowering his arm, he screamed at them, "Arseholes." The pain in his head flared right up. There was so much pain. He felt as if he was also being squeezed into a tiny ball. He could barely breathe. He was losing focus. The pain was too much. He screamed a scream of extreme agony at the ceiling. There was a flash of white light, and he felt as if he had exploded from the inside out. Blackness. The peace of unconsciousness. June 1987, 4 years earlier, young Harry Potter grew up always knowing he had a weird sort of memory. He could remember the most detailed points of individual events, right down to the feel of how warm or cold he felt, what the air smelled like, the feel of something on his hands or elsewhere on his skin. The memories were always extraordinarily detailed and vivid, but those memories always were disjointed, like he was remembering fractions of whole memories. And memories would intrude at the oddest moments. The memories often intruded at the worst times, the memories that made it hard for him to concentrate completely on the task before him. One of those times was when he was washing the dishes. A memory, triggered by a sound from outside, flashed up into his mind while he was washing a frying pan. He dropped the pan, and his aunt hit him in the side of the head with it. The next thing he remembered was waking up in his cupboard late at night or early in the morning. That was the night the headache started. The one that never went away. The next morning he was sent to school with the headache still greatly bothering him, walking to school in a roundabout route. To avoid his cousin's new gang from laying in wait for him, he spent the time thinking about how he could make his mind stop bothering him. He waited until the lunch break and quickly went into the school library. There he sought out books that covered memory. There he found a book that covered improving one's memory recall. Quickly he found a place to sit and read. He read through it and moved on to the next, then the next. It took him a few weeks to read everything the library had to cover on memory. However, he began to understand what his problem was. He learned about people who had perfect memory, and he learned how people developed perfect memory. He learned about mind palaces and how people who had to speak in public used them to remember their speeches or their lines of script. He also learned that meditation was often used by people to remember things, and how meditation could be used to order an unordered mind or one that was simply cluttered with unorganized memories. So during those times he was locked in cupboard, he learned to meditate. Once he managed to meditate, he learned to review his memories, and he learned how to file them away within his mind. To file them away, he built a palace within his mind. And within that palace, he created library shelves, and on those library shelves, he filed his memories. At first it took a lot of effort, as things moved slowly. Each memory took time to sort out and find a place within his shelf space to place it. One of the first things he learned after that was that he wouldn't have enough shelf space to file everything, and that, once he did, how would he quickly find everything again? And he also quickly learned that, while he was meditating or was sorting his memories, his headache receded. When he was locked in his cupboard and knew he wouldn't be allowed out for hours, he meditated. And after many months of practice, he could drop into his meditative state while still allowing all 5 senses to be aware. This he called conscious meditation rather than the deep meditation of when he shut all senses off, or when he was sorting memories. He had also learned from the school librarian at his primary school that he could order library books be brought it on short-term loans. The librarian had come to like the young raven-haired boy for his focus on quiet study. So when he asked her if the library could purchase more books on a particular subject, she took the time to explain to him about the interlibrary exchange system, and Harry made a lot of use out of it. Some of the things Harry learned during those early days and into the following few years, creating his mind palace and ordering his memories, made it immensely easier for him to recall at will. He had a whole set of memories from when he was an infant that looked like hallucinations. Either that or magic existed. He was rarely any longer distracted by stray memories, and he was looking at knocking those back to being even rarer. He required far less sleep. 5. He was rarely bothered by the headache anymore unless he got angry. 6. He was able to better control his emotions, so was far less likely to become angry. He could speed read a book at the library, memorizing its contents. Then he could spend the time to read it while he was in his meditative state. Even then it was still read faster than normal. 8. If the memories he had as an infant were real, then he knew what had really happened to his parents, and why he was now living with the Dursleys. 9. He only had to study something once, and he knew it from then on. He did not need to review his work, nor study for exams. 24th July 1991, 4 years later. Harry Potter was standing at the stove, cleaning it, while his so-called family were either gorging themselves, his uncle and cousin, or overly primly picky eating their breakfasts. The same breakfasts he'd only recently finished cooking but was not allowed to partake in. As always, he was focusing on keeping his anger in check while he went about the chore. The sound of a squeaky hinge came from the front of the house. That was the sound of the mail flap. "Dudley," snorted his uncle, "go and get the mail." The fat cousin angrily whined, "Make Harry get it, I've not finished." With barely a pause, the uncle snapped out, "Boy, get the mail." Tamping his rising anger down, Harry replied, "Yes, Uncle Vernon." He placed the cleaning rag and spray cleaner on the bench top alongside the stove and went out into the entry hall to collect the mail. Picking it up from the floor, he quickly began to sort through it. His uncle demanded the mail be sorted with the junk mail immediately disposed of into the bin. Quickly sorting the mail, Harry found a most unusual envelope amongst the normal mail. It was unusual in that it was made of a type of paper he'd not come across before. It lacked a stamp or postal mark and was addressed to him, even down to his cupboard under the stairs. It was also the first item of mail he'd ever personally received. It left him stunned. Hesitating but a moment, he quickly stuffed it into the front left pocket of his oversized and torn jeans before returning to the final sorting of the mail, and quickly walked back to the kitchen. After all, it would not do for his so-called relatives to wait one moment longer than they absolutely had to when receiving their mail. Placing the mail next to his uncle's right hand without a word, Harry quickly returned to cleaning the stove. The sooner he had the cure done, the sooner he could begin on cleaning the breakfast dishes, and the sooner he could retreat to his cupboard to find out who and why someone had written to him. After he had the dishes and cutlery of the Dursleys' breakfast put away, Harry was able to return to his cupboard. He'd managed this time to grab 2 slices of now cold toast and some uneaten bacon. These he pulled out of his pockets to make a sandwich. After making it, he put the sandwich down and drew out the letter addressed to him out of his pocket. Opening it, he found a couple of sheets of what looked like somewhat stiff, slightly yellow paper made of the same material as the envelope. Written therein, apparently, he had been accepted to attend a magic school called Hogwarts. The letter also held a document detailing what school supplies he'd need. One of the items, a cauldron, triggered within him a memory. It was a memory of a place called the Leaky Cauldron, which stood as the gateway between the non-magical and magical reals of Britain. Meditating for a moment, he entered his mind palace and found the relevant memory. Reviewing it, he found where it was located, Charing Cross Road, near Leicester Square Tube Station, then a short walk south. Identified by a swinging sign of a cauldron with a big crack near the bottom, the wall had only a dark wooden door in a blank white wall. Now, how to get there? He searched his memories relating to maps and found what he needed. A quick scan through and he had it figured out. He needed to catch an overland National Rail train to Balham, then switch to the underground rail system for the Northern Line, then ride straight through to Leicester Square. Getting there and back wasn't difficult. His mental rail maps said it would only take him a little over 2 hours each way. Convincing his aunt to allow him to go to the local public library for the day would only require a little persuasion. He only had to play to her insecurities, using what he learned in the book Reinventing Influence. But did he want to come back? No, not really. He knew the lies his aunt and uncle told him about his parents, and how he came to have the scar on his forehead were just that, lies. And he remembered being taken to the bank in that alley behind the pub. No, he'd tell his aunt he was heading out for the day so he wouldn't be underfoot, and make his way directly to the bank. There, he hoped to find out if his parents had left him any money. If not, he'd race back home and do what he could to make his own way in life. He had secreted away in his little cupboard about £20. He had a little sideline going on with other kids in school. He hid in the library and did their homework for them, but they had to meet his prices. When they did, they received back homework worthy of top marks. All they had to do was rewrite it in their own handwriting. No one but his personal agents knew his real identity. And even if someone managed to get one of the said agents to divulge the identity of the homework expert, nobody believed them, because Harry Potter was known as a poor student. He was even a worse student than his obese cousin, no matter how much time he appeared to spend in the library seemingly studying. If his cousin earned 50% on an assignment, Harry received 48%. He was always a few marks behind, a few points behind, but no one could work out why. No one knew that he would be beaten by both his cousin and his fat uncle if he brought home a report card that showed better marks than dear Duddekins. No one knew the efforts to which Harry went in appearing to be a slightly worse student than his cousin. No one knew his greatest secret. The morning after receiving his letter, Harry was up early. He feed-bagged the Dursleys, cleaned up the breakfast dishes, cleaned the kitchen, and then used his recently learned influencing skills on his aunt. Some information about how he could make her day easier if he wasn't there for the day, and he was able to get out. He quickly made his way to the local National Rail train station, and he was on his way to Balham Underground Station. Just under half an hour later, and he was on an underground rail car and on his way up the Northern Line direct to Leicester Square. The trip was quicker than he thought it would be, considering it was both a work day and early morning. However, he was soon walking quickly along Charing Cross Road, keeping a close look out for the sign for the leaky cauldron. It didn't take him long to find the pub before he was able to duck in through the door. He remembered to calmly walk through and straight out the back door into the alleyway. However, once he was in the alley, he couldn't find a memory of how to get through to the other side of the brick wall before him. So he just waited. It was only a few minutes later before the bricks began to open up with someone wanting to come through from the other side, and he was able to duck through. Keeping his head down and out from underfoot, he made his way down the alley. If he remembered right, the big marble building halfway down the alley was the bank he needed. Gringotts, standing either side of the door, he could see most fierce creatures that seemed to only be as tall as he was, and they were armed with old-fashioned pikes and double-bladed axes. He calmly walked in through the big stone pillars and the big double doors. Once inside, he looked around to see if there was anyone he could talk to about finding out if he had any money. He soon spotted another one of the creatures that stood guard outside behind a high counter. Steeling his emotions, he approached the counter and waited. He really didn't know if he should say anything or not. Waiting there for only a minute, but seemingly longer, the creature seemed to notice him and snarled, "What do you want, little wizard?" Steeling himself, Harry calmly but quietly said, "I'm sorry to bother you, sir, but I'd like to find out if my parents left any money for me here when they died." The creature stopped what it was doing as Harry spoke, staring back for a few moments. It seemed to think for a few moments before it asked, "What is your name?" Harry quickly replied, "Harry Potter, sir." Again the creature just stared at him, but Harry did notice it, glanced quickly at the scar just visible under his long fringe on his forehead. It was at least a few moments before it said, "Wait there and I'll have the Potter account manager send for you." Then it grabbed a small piece of the same paper that Harry's letter was made of, and a gnarled-looking pen. It wrote a few things on it and dropped it into a slot on the bench he was working upon before it hit a button. The creature then ignored him, performing other tasks. After what appeared to be a minute, Harry was getting impatient and was about to ask what was going on when he heard a voice behind him. "Mr. Potter?" the voice asked. Turning around, he came face to face with another of the creatures standing looking at him. "Yes," said Harry. "Follow me, please," said the creature before it turned away and started walking into the depths of the bank. 3 hours later, and Harry was walking out of the bank. He was struggling to maintain his composure. His anger was threatening to open into a full rage. He was feeling stifled. He stalked, really, back up the alley a little before he stopped. He needed a distraction. He needed something to take his mind off what he'd just been told. A look up the alley and he saw what looked like a bookshop called Flourish and Blots. Reading always calmed him down. And now that he had in his pocket a bag of gold coins, he could buy his own books instead of borrowing them from the library. He entered the shop and took a look around. The creatures, goblins as he now knew they were called, were not happy with him at first, and it wasn't even his fault. At first, after an initial blood test to confirm his identity, they wanted to know why he was not accepting owls, and it took a bit of effort by both parties to clear up the confusion before they managed to explain that wizarding mail was couriered by owls, and until he explained and showed them that the only item of mail he'd ever received was his acceptance letter from Hogwarts. The goblins were very unhappy to hear that, and informed him they'd investigate why their owls were not getting through to him. Once those initial problems were overcome, his Potter account keeper goblin, Bloodfang, gave him an overview of the state of the Potter accounts. It took a while as they had to stop every now and then due to Harry needing to get his anger under control about what he'd learned. Harry was also allowed to go down to collect money from his trust vault, where he also collected a special coin pouch the cart goblin was able to show him was larger inside than outside, and pick up 2 envelopes that had his name on them in 2 different styles of handwriting. He was then allowed to look in the other 2 vaults, one for records and documents and a few other items, and one full of heirlooms and gold. However, he was not allowed to enter either until, as the goblins called it, he was of age. On returning to the surface, Bloodfang stepped him through the process of having the coin pouch bloodlocked to him against theft and the like, and handed him a full accounting of his financial holdings. These he carried in a document pouch the old goblin gifted him with. He currently had it slung crossways from his right shoulder to his left hip. In the bookshop, after having looked around for a while, he approached a sales clerk and asked her to assist him in getting the books he needed for his first year at Hogwarts. She smiled at him and said, "Sure, dear, just give me a moment." He waited for her to finish a task she was in the middle of completing before she walked around the counter and said to him, "All Hogwarts textbooks can be found together in a row over here." And she led him to an aisle on the opposite side of the store from the main counter. In this aisle, you find each year's texts are separated by year. First year's at the front of the store through to 7th year at the back. Looking down the aisle, Harry said, "Thank you. And if you wouldn't mind, could you show me where I'll find books on introducing someone to the magic world and Hogwarts, information on the ancient families, and magic relating to the mind?" "Certainly, dear," said the clerk, and she led him through the store indicating the relevant sections. "Thank you," said Harry, allowing the young lady to return to her duties. Knowing that the textbooks for his first year at Hogwarts were all together and already sorted on the shelves, he decided to collect those last. Browsing the books, he soon came across a section that was labeled Harry Potter. Frowning and wondering why there was a section with his name upon it, he scanned the titles he found there. There were stories written about him, plus a couple of books that were supposedly factual about what happened on and around 31st of October 1981, the night his parents were murdered and he was taken from his home. He grabbed one of the children novels, Harry Potter and the Deadly Dragon, and 2 of the fact books about that fateful night, Harry Potter, The Boy Who Lived, and The Boy Who Lived, Our Youngest Hero. Then he found a book titled Introduction to Mind Magics that he hoped would help him with his anger issues and headache. A book on Hogwarts called Hogwarts, A History to Learn About the School. A book called A History of the Ancient Houses, where he hoped to learn more about his own family. Another called An Introduction to the Wizarding World. a fifth titled Noble Etiquette, as he was supposed to be from what was called a noble and ancient house, and because it looked interesting and might be able to help him remain incognito, a book on basic charms that covered altering one's appearance called Simple Cantrips for the Beauty Conscious. With those 9 books loading down in his arms, he carried them to the front counter. Looking at the clerk, he asked, "Do you mind if I leave these here while I collect my school texts?" "That'll be fine, dear," replied the clerk, barely even glancing up. "We're not that busy today." Harry then ducked quickly back to the aisle with the Hogwarts' texts and quickly gathered them up before returning to the counter with them. While he'd been gone, the clerk had already begun to ring up his purchases on the old-fashioned mechanical till, so as soon as he brought the second pile of books, she smoothly transitioned from the last book in the first pile to the first book in the second pile. When she'd finished, she told him the total value. While he was withdrawing the correct number of galleons from his pouch, she drew her wand and caused the whole pile to be bundled and tied together in 2 packages. After pulling out the correct number of galleons, Harry was able to watch the clerk give a last few twitches on her wand while his packages looked to do a merry dance, and they were tied. "Okay," thought Harry, "that's what it looks like to perform magic." He handed over the galleons and received his change in sickles and nuts, dropping them into his pouch. "Would you like me to shrink them for you, dear?" she asked. Harry frowned at her and asked back, "Shrink?" Looking back in confusion for just a moment, the clerk suddenly brightened. "Oh? Of course, you'd be a muggle born. That's why you bought, amongst other things, the book An Introduction to the Wizarding World. I'm sorry, I should have realized." Harry just frowned back, not considering correcting her. Blushing a little, the clerk said, "Watch," and she caused the 2 packages to shrink down until they were about equal in size to a matchbox each. Tucking her wand up her sleeve, she said, "Now, to unshrink them, all you need to do is press firmly on the knot of the string," and she demonstrated before reshrinking the package. "See?" Harry just nodded, though he was quite surprised by what he saw. The clerk, taking pity on him, said, "Now, as you don't seem to have purchased any other things of your school supplies, I suggest you head down the alley to Porter's Portmanteaus to purchase your school trunk. Ask Mr. Porter to place a featherweight charm on the trunk. That way, you'll have something to carry all your purchases within while you shop." And she smiled at him. Harry thanked the young woman before picking up the shrunken packages and dropping them in his pocket. On his way down to the shop the clerk directed him to, Harry found a cafe. One look at the sign saying hot food, and Harry's tummy growled. So he decided to stop first and see in buying some lunch. Besides, he also wanted to read the 2 letters that were left to him in his trustful. After placing his order for lunch, he sat in an inside booth and withdrew the 2 envelopes. Hesitating a moment, he gave a mental shrug and opened the one on top first. Inside was a letter written in the same flowing script in which his name was written on the front of the envelope. "My dearest Harry, I hope by the time you read this you've grown into a wonderful young man under the care of either your godmother, Lady Alice Longbottom, and her husband, Lord Franklin Longbottom, or with your godfather, Sirius Black, if dear Alice and Frank weren't able to take you in. If you've grown up with the Longbottoms, then you would have also grown up alongside young Neville, a boy who is only a few hours older than you. If you were raised by Sirius, you used to call him Paffle, then I hope you're not getting into too much mischief with pranks. No matter who raised you, I hope your life to the day you read this letter has been a happy one, and that it will continue to be so. Know that your father and I love you and will continue to love you from the great beyond. You are my darling baby boy. Your mum, Lady Lily Potter." After reading the letter and not knowing whether to be happy to have read a letter from his own mother or be angry he didn't grow up with his godmother or godfather, he put the letter back into the envelope and set it aside. Picking up the second envelope, he already guessed it would be from his father. "Hey, Prungslit! Yes, that's you, Harry. If you're reading this letter, it means I wasn't there to help you grow up, and I'm really sorry about that. However, I hope you still have had a happy childhood with the Longbottoms, or one of the other magical persons we specified in our wills with whom you were to be raised. For your information, here is the order of people written in your mother's and my wills who should have raised you. Lady Alice Longbottom and her husband Lord Francis Frank Longbottom. Lady Longbottom is your sworn godmother, as your mother is sworn godmother of Frank and Alice's boy Neville. Sirius Black and his wife, if he finally finds someone to settle down and marry, Sirius is your sworn godfather. Lord Cygnus and Lady Isabel Greengrass, dear friends, plus your betrothed to their daughter Daphne, see below. Amelia Bones and her husband, if she marries, a dear friend from within the DMLE. Now, about Daphne, your mother tells me I need to apologize. When you were born, I was so happy that I called some friends over to the manor. Your mother was still in hospital at this time, otherwise she would have stopped things before they got out of hand. You see, I, together with Sirius, Remus, Frank, Cygnus, and a few of the chaps from within the DMLE we could trust, decided we had to celebrate your birth while the ladies were all with your mum at the hospital with you. It was also a bit of respite for us from the horrors of the war. As you can guess, we got a bit carried away. The next morning, Cygnus and I discovered we had signed a betrothal contract between you and his new infant daughter, Daphne. Your mother nor your auntie, Isabel, were happy when we finally admitted it to them, nor were they happy when they discovered we signed it with a blood quill and that it was unbreakable. If Daphne's looks, when she grows up, are anything like her mother's, then I hope you won't be too angry with me. There is a copy of the betrothal contract in the Potter heirloom vault in the filing cabinet. Ask Bloodfang, the Potter account keeper, or his replacement if there's been one since I wrote this letter, for a copy of it. And please forgive your dear old departed dad for being an idiot, even if your mother hasn't yet. Once you turn 11, you will become the new head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter. You will also take up your lordship when you are of age or are legally emancipated, whichever comes first. Potter is a very old wizarding house that traces its roots back many, many centuries. It's something for you of which to be very proud, as am I. I don't know when you will read this letter, but hopefully it will be well before your 11th birthday, so you will have time to adjust to this news. Plus, you will need time and training to learn what it means to be the head of such an ancient house. Your guardians and Bloodfang or his successor will be able to help you with this. You also need to know that the Potters are openly in alliance with the houses of Longbottom and Bones, and are secretly in alliance with the houses of Black and Greengrass. If you haven't already done so, you need to contact the heads of those houses at your earliest opportunities, once you take up your headship of House Potter after your 11th birthday. This is very important. It can be viewed as a snub to their houses and the alliances if you don't. But your approach to the heads of the Black and Greengrass families must be done carefully and in secret if you already are not in contact with them. Now that the scary official stuff is out of the way, I want you to know that I love you with all my heart. I want you to have a very happy and long life and have lots of sons and daughters of your own, so you can experience just how much we love you. You are also the son of a marauder, so I expect to be watching you pull lots of pranks. I will be laughing with you when you pull them. Your loving father, James Dad Potter. Still sleeping on the couch due to that marriage contract, Harry placed that letter back in its envelope and wiped the tears out of his eyes as he did so. While enjoying his lunch at the cafe in Diagon Alley, Harry spent quite a bit of time thinking about the 2 letters from his parents. He didn't know what he thought about being betrothed to this Daphne Greengrass girl, other than it annoyed him. However, he also understood from what his father explained, it couldn't be broken, and therefore there was no use getting all upset about it. He promised himself he wouldn't be angry with the poor girl, as she was just as obviously stuck with him as he was with her. But all bets were off when it came to this Cygnus Greengrass man when Harry finally met him. Finishing his lunch and tucking his letters away in his new document pouch, Harry headed down to Porter's portmanteaus. He found the shop as described and entered to find a man similar in stature to his Uncle Vernon. However, this man seemed like a much more placid individual. The shop appeared empty of customers. Seeing the young boy walk in, the man walked over to him and said, "Hello, young sir. Here to purchase your school trunk, I suppose. I'm Waldo Porter, by the way." "Yes, sir," replied Harry. "I'm told I need one." "That you do, young sir," said Mr. Porter. "Follow me and we'll soon get you sorted." And he led Harry to a wall where were stacked quite a few trunks, all appearing identical. Now, said Mr. Porter, gesturing, these are the standard school trunks I sell, designed to the specifications required of a Hogwarts student. They don't have any special charms on them other than a standard anti-unlocking charm, and have standard key locks. Part of the purchase price includes having your name printed center on the top of the trunk near the front edge. That way it's easily identifiable as your own. Frowning in thought for a moment, Harry asked, "Charms, sir. The lady at the bookshop, Flourish and Blots, suggested I get one that also had a featherweight charm on it. Are there any other charms or spells I can have?" "Certainly, young sir," replied the shopkeeper, "but those sorts of things can cost quite a bit more." "That's okay," said Harry. "I can afford it. What can I have?" Looking Harry over a bit, the shopkeeper replied, "Forgive me, young sir, but from your current attire, you don't appear to be able to afford much more than that." Looking down at the state of his clothing, Harry frowned and said, "I guess you're correct in that assumption, sir. First appearances can be deceiving." Looking back up, he said, "I guess I better purchase clothing more suited then. First, you wouldn't happen to know where I can acquire clothing more suited to my newly discovered station, would you? Then I'll come back." Wondering just who this well-spoken young man was, the shopkeeper replied, "Just back up the alley and next door to Flourish and Blots. There you'll find Madame Malkins. She'll set you to rights." "Thank you," said Harry, before simply turning around and walking back out the store. As directed, he easily found Madame Malkins and entered the store. Once inside, he found a small family with a child about his own age, standing on a small circular platform being fitted for what looked like a school uniform. Waiting for a few minutes, he was soon approached by what he thought of as another saleswoman, who asked, "Are you here to be fitted for your Hogwarts robes, dear?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied, "plus some other clothes." "We can do that," she said. "Come over to the fitting area and we'll get you sorted in a jiffy." Harry followed the lady across the store and mounted another of the platforms. He turned to see a floor-length mirror reflecting his image back to him. "Now I'll just take your measurements, dear, and we can get started," the saleswoman said, taking out a tape measure that seemed to spring to life and start taking his measurements on its own. "Feet slightly apart and arms out like the letter T for a few moments, dear," she said, watching carefully. Harry followed her instructions and watched as a quill rapidly wrote on a floating piece of parchment as she watched the measuring. "Now, arms down and legs together," she said after a few moments. Harry complied. When the tape stopped measuring and the quill stopped writing, she plucked both out of the air. The tape she dropped into a pocket of her robes, and the parchment and quill she clipped onto a stand just in front of him and off to the side a bit. "First year, dear?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." Taking note of what was written on the parchment, she asked, "Are you just looking for the standard robes, dear?" "No, ma'am," replied Harry. "I also need a whole new wardrobe for when I'm not wearing school uniform, such as for now," as she said, perking up a little. "Well, let's get the Hogwarts robes sorted first, then we'll move on to the rest of the wardrobe." She ducked out through a door leading to the back of the store. While Harry was quickly fitted with his Hogwarts uniform and robes, the other student and his family left. This left him as the only customer in the store. When the sales clerk returned from the back with what he assumed as the rest of his uniform, he said, "As I said, I'm going to need all new other clothing too, ma'am." Glancing up from where she was bundling up his uniform, she said, "Yes, dear, and now that we have your uniform set aside, what other clothing do you want?" Pushing down on his frustration at the woman, he said, "As I believe I said, I need a whole new wardrobe." Thinking for a minute, he said, "You see, everything item of clothing I currently own, I'm wearing right now." The sales clerk reared back as if physically slapped. "What? Do you mean to tell me you have nothing else to wear?" Though even more frustrated, Harry replied, "That's exactly what I'm saying, ma'am. I just found out my parents left me quite a bit of money in that Gringotts bank, so I'm now able to finally buy some clothes of my own." Worried that the woman was going to call the police or something, and he couldn't have that happen, he thought harder and said, "I recently had a growth spurt and these things I'm wearing are the only things that fit me now." That appeared to mollify the woman somewhat. She said, "Outfitting you with a complete wardrobe is going to cost quite a bit of money, young man. Do you think you can afford it?" "Definitely, ma'am," he said quite emphatically. He untied his money pouch from his belt and said, "I withdrew quite a large sum from the bank to take care of this." The woman stood looking at him for a while, frowning. Obviously coming to a conclusion, she asked, "Do you have more than, say, 100 galleons to spend?" "Yes, ma'am," replied Harry. "More than that." Sighing, the woman said, "Very well, I take it you need underwear and shoes too." "Everything, ma'am." Straightening herself up, she gave a curt nod and asked, "Any preferences?" "No, ma'am, except I need clothes for all sorts of weather, and I have no idea what I want or need," replied Harry. "So, I'm hoping you can help me pick out my wardrobe for me." Giving a wry smile in return, she said, "Well, I've not met many boys who have much of a clue about fashion, so I'm glad to see you have the sense to ask for help in that area." Smiling back, Harry said, "I'm glad you understand, ma'am, and thank you." "Then let's get to it, shall we?" she asked with a grin. "I think I'm going to have quite a bit of fun doing this." That began over 2 hours of constantly dressing and undressing for Harry. He tried on formal, casual and semi-casual robes, decided between boxers and briefs, and what colors he was shown into the muggle clothing area, and tried on shirts, trousers, jeans, jackets, coats, scarves, hats, caps, footwear, belts, and other paraphernalia, and even purchased a whole new range of toiletries. While they were working, Harry told her he was raised in the muggle world, so she explained a lot about the wizarding world to which he'd just entered. Though she occasionally pushed for information about his home life, Harry remained reticent for much of it, and only told her information that didn't identify him or how he was raised. Again, he didn't want her calling the police on him. However, he did ask where he could find temporary accommodation, and used the excuse he had much more shopping to do, and he knew needed to stay overnight before heading home. She suggested that the leaky cauldron was the best option for short-term accommodation. Harry took her suggestion on board. When they were finished, the woman was shocked to discover the total came to a figure well in excess of the original 100 galleons, but Harry paid it without a problem. After the woman packed and shrunk all his purchases down, with the exception of a muggle baseball-style cap, which he immediately donned, Harry gave her a bit of a jaunty wave and headed back up to the leaky cauldron. He had noticed the storybook about him, or rather, the fictional Harry Potter, had a pretty good description of him right down to the scar on his forehead. He wanted it covered up and something to cover his face a little. He knew that if he was recognized, he would probably be taken by the police back to his aunt and uncle's house, and that was the last thing he wanted to happen. At the leaky cauldron, the old bartender, Tom, rented him a room under the name of Harrison Smith. Harry was surprised how easy it was for him to get the room, and how few questions were asked about how or why a 10-year-old boy was staying on his own. Tom ran through a clearly rehearsed spiel about the facilities available to his temporary tenants, such as when meals would be served, room service, shower and bathroom facilities, and behavior required to remain, and Harry politely accepted his key and headed upstairs. He dropped his packages off and returned downstairs. "Is the room to your satisfaction, young sir?" inquired Tom. "Yes, thank you," replied Harry. "I'm just going to duck out to make a telephone call and I'll be back shortly," and left via the door onto Charing Cross Road. A few hundred feet back up from where he'd come from the underground, Harry found the red wooden phone box he'd remembered on the way to the wizarding pub. He ducked in, fished a few pence out his pocket, and made his call to his aunt. After telling her he would not be returning as he had decided to run away and had found somewhere else to live, she screeched at him about how ungrateful he was and demanded he never return. He hung up on her before she could go into a full rant. Heaving a sigh of relief, he returned to the leaky cauldron and climbed the stairs back to his room. A quick change into what he was told was basic casual wizard wear, and he was back downstairs. He retained his money pouch, document pouch, and his Hogwarts letter, with the intent on gathering up the rest of his Hogwarts supplies, just in case. He watched as a wizard ahead of him tapped certain bricks on the wall in a certain order and waited for the man to pass through, sticking close behind as he did so. Once back in the alley proper, Harry headed back down the alley. On the way, he spotted a sign on a small building that said Owl Office, that had owls flying in and out of high skylights. He had to send off his acceptance letter back to Hogwarts, so used the opportunity to get it done right away. He found the concept of using owls to send mail both quaint and amazing. The man behind the counter said that many in the wizarding world also kept their own personal owls, so they didn't have to keep coming into the office. Harry thought it was a good idea to have one, and would get one as soon as he had time. The letter from Hogwarts even said he could have an owl as a pet if he wanted one, so he knew he could take it with him. After he'd unshrunk his purchases, he realized just how much stuff he now owned, and that he'd also have quite a bit more of his school supplies to add to it. Remembering the dimensions of the school trunks in the store, he wondered how he was going to fit it all in. He thought he might have to buy two and hoped he'd be allowed both at Hogwarts. He'd ask Mr. Porter, the store proprietor. Continuing his walk down the alley, he returned directly to Porter's portmanteaus. Trunks, first put everything in, then the rest of the shopping, he thought. When Harry explained to the portly Mr. Porter, and he gave himself a wry grin for that alliteration, his need for more luggage, and being congratulated on his proper wizarding attire, the man took Harry over to another area within the store. "Here we have moleskin-lined trunks," explained the man. "They're more expensive than the standard school trunk, but they're charmed to be multi-compartmented, and to have more room inside than what's apparent from the outside." Mr. Porter demonstrated by opening one trunk and showing Harry what they looked like. Pleased that his space requirements would be so easily met, Harry asked, "What else can be done with them?" Mr. Porter quickly went through some of the extras available with Harry, carefully noting everything the man said. In the end, Harry purchased a standard black school trunk with 2 compartments, both enlarged. For safety's sake, he had it keyed with a keyless lock that only opened to his own magical signature by him pressing his thumb on a metal plate, where a mechanical key would normally be fitted. He also had wheels fitted to one end, plus a permanent featherweight charm as suggested by the lass in the bookshop, that was activated and deactivated by pressing on what he learned to be an embedded runestone. Harry ended up paying almost 100 galleons for the trunk and organized to have it delivered to his room in the leaky cauldron. When the man asked him what his name was, Harry was at first hesitant to tell him. However, he remembered he had to give it, so it was printed on the trunk. With a sigh, he said, "It's Harry Potter. But please keep it to yourself. I'm trying to remain incognito here." Recoiling a little in shock, the man then bent down to take a closer look at Harry's face. The shopkeeper clearly searched for and found the scar on his forehead. Straightening back up and looking at Harry curiously, he said, "Well, Lordy B, so you are. If you'd told me your name when you first came in, I would have known right away you'd be able to purchase one of our more upmarket models of trunk." With a scowl, Harry said, "I really am trying to remain incognito here. I don't like the fact I'm famous and don't want it bandied about. I'm in the alley, I'd not be able to get anything done otherwise." Nodding in response, Mr. Porter said, "Well, as you're a high-paying customer, I will keep your confidence, Mr. Potter. If folks knew you were here, you'd get mobbed pretty quickly." Harry just deepened his scowl. "However, are you aware you're entitled to have your house crest on your trunk, as well as your name?" the shopkeeper asked. "No, sir," replied Harry. "However, if everyone else just gets their name, then I'll have that too." Thinking a bit, Harry then asked, "And can it be covered up for the time being? I don't want anyone to see it until I go to Hogwarts." Thinking a bit, the shopkeeper said, "Certainly, I can put a wizard notice me not charm on that small area that will mean people won't look at it. And you can remove it with a simple charm-cancelling charm when you board the Hogwarts Express on the 1st of September. It's a simple spell that you can do by simply waving your wand across the area and giving the incantation, finite incanting." Harry gave a nod and said, "Yes, please, do that. And when the trunk's ready, can you have it delivered to the leaky cauldron in the name of Harrison Smith? That's my guardian. Tom has been kind enough to hold my things for me in my guardian's name until it's time to leave." "I can certainly do that for you, Mr. Potter," replied the shopkeeper. "Tom often avails others of that service." "Thank you," said Harry with a bit of relief. He hated lying about himself, but he needed to do it if he was not going to get caught and sent back to his unloving relatives. After paying for his new school trunk, Harry exited the store, withdrew his sheet listing his school supplies, and read down to see what to do next. While he didn't actually need the list, as he had it all memorized, it gave him the excuse of keeping his head down and face covered. Wand, telescope, cauldron, potion supplies, quills and parchment, and an owl plus things to take care of an owl, he thought. I'll start at the bottom of the alley and work my way back to the leaky cauldron, picking up things along the way. Harry turned down the alley and headed for the end. Though he'd spent quite a bit of time sorting out new clothing and his trunk, the rest went pretty easily. The only delay was in purchasing his wand. He spent about half an hour in the store of the creepy old man before he found a wand, 11 inches long, made of holly with a phoenix feather core. According to the old man, it was supposedly the brother wand to Voldemort's. That too, he thought, creepy. Harry was glad when he was finally out of the store. He'd purchased his wand, a wand care kit and a wrist holster for it that he could affix to his left arm. He donned the holster, pushed the wand into it, and made a few practice draws with it before he left the store. The rest of the trip back up the alley meant he was able to collect the rest of his school supplies even quicker than he expected. Many of the shops he visited had already prepared kits of what students would need for Hogwarts. When he was finally able to return to the leaky cauldron, he was able to use his own wand and open the portal himself. Once back in the leaky cauldron, Tom saw him walk in and told him his new trunk was already in his room, and that dinner would be available from 5:00 p.m. Harry Harrison was just to come down and let him know what he wanted, and he'd have it all ready for him in a jiffy. Harry gave his thanks and headed up to his room. He just had a pretty stressful day and knew he'd have an early dinner before finally getting to sleep in a real bed. Once back in his room, he unshrunk the rest of his things, unpacked them, and repacked them into his trunk. All his school supplies went in one compartment, his normal wear and toiletries in the other. He left his books out for something to read. Just after 5:00 p.m., he picked out the books Harry Potter, the Boy Who Lived, and an Introduction to the Wizarding World, and carried them back down to the pub's common room. As soon as he sat, Tom came over and gave him a short menu of what was available for the dinner session. He gave his order and ordered a butterbeer when told the Wizarding World did not stock fizzy drinks, and settled down to read. After enjoying his first proper meal ever, Harry remained at the table for a while and continued to read. He'd already filtered out listening to the sounds going on around him and was deep into the fiction masquerading as fact that was Harry Potter, the Boy Who Lived. The book contained just enough fact about what actually happened to make the rest of it, the fantasy, appear real, and he was livid. On a couple of occasions while reading, he had to set the book aside and firmly push his anger back into the background using his meditative techniques. At those times, he also switched books to an Introduction to the Wizarding World, which he found dry but still interesting. It was while reading that book he came to understand a lot of what he saw and experienced while moving about the alley and the pub. It was also the second book that gave him an insight in how to deal with the first book. While it appeared laws regarding libel in the Wizarding World had not caught up to its counterparts in the Muggle world, a good solicitor barrister could still go after those who were using his name to profit. And Harry had a particular hate for those who wanted to use him, the Dursleys included. However, that was for another day. As the books clearly had a very good description of just what Harry Potter looked like, the next day would be used learning from simple cantrips for the beauty-conscious for methods by which to disguise his appearance. Noticing the common room emptying, Harry made his way back upstairs to his room, giving the old bartender a little wave as he walked by. Once in his room, Harry put his 2 books away with the others and settled down for his first night's sleep in a real bed. While lying there before sleep claimed him, he reviewed his mental to-do list for the next day. Harry awoke at 5:30 a.m. the next day, the time he always had to rise in the mornings on a weekday to make breakfast for the Dursleys. At first he was startled to realize he wasn't in his cupboard. It took a moment for him to realize he never had to go back to that place ever again. He grinned. Rising, he grabbed his newly purchased personal toiletries and headed for the communal bathroom. In there, he enjoyed a leisurely shower, something he'd never had at the Dursleys, and returned to his room to dress in his new civilian wizarding robes. He found himself grinning the whole time. Not even his perpetual headache could dampen his mood. He did, however, hesitate before strapping his wand holster to his off forearm. It was going to take a little time for him to include it as part of his new automatic morning ritual. He ducked downstairs to the common room and found Tom just starting to prepare for the new day. "Good morning, Tom," said a chipper Harry. "And a good morning to you too, Mr. Smith," replied the barman. "The grill's not been warmed up yet, so breakfast will be available from about 7:00 a.m., if that's all right with you." "That'll be fine, thanks," replied Harry. "What's on the menu?" "Standard fare, young sir," replied the old barman, turning back to what he was doing behind the bar. "Just let me know what you'd like, and I'll see what I can do." Thinking for a few moments, Harry replied, "How about scrambled eggs on toast with a side of bacon and coffee?" Nodding without looking up, Tom replied, "Can do. Would you like me to have it delivered to your room when it's ready?" Hesitating a moment, Harry said, "Actually, that sounds like a great idea." "Thanks, Tom." "You're more than welcome," replied the old barman. And with a sharp nod, Harry ducked back upstairs. By the time the meal was ready, Harry was already deep into the book Simple Cantrips for the Beauty Conscious, and had marked a few pages. He'd found a charm that would cover the scar on his forehead, one that would change the color of his eyes, and another that changed the color of his hair. He was just finishing changing his hair color and lengthening it a bit when a young witch delivered his breakfast and placed it on the small table in his room. He thanked the young lady and gave her a galleon tip for her efforts. She was, at first, startled to see the gold coin in her hand. "Hey," he thought with a smile, "I have money now. Besides, I liked seeing the expression on her face when I gave it to her." After breaking his fast, Harry went back out to the alley to take a decent look around. As he'd already collected his supplies for the upcoming school year, plus a lot of personal effects including a whole new wardrobe, this time he was just taking a wander around to see what there was to see. He also had his daily to-do list to run through. But there was no hurry at present. First he walked through as much of the alley as he could. Excluding those shops he'd already visited while purchasing his supplies, he stepped into each shop and memorized the layout. Some were only small and required a step through the door by a few feet and lightly peruse the shelves or racks. Others, the bigger shops, required walking further in and walking the aisles. It was during this ambulatory sojourn he discovered a small shop up a set of stairs between two larger shops that specialized in eyewear and specialist jewelry. Ascending the stairs and entering the main floor of the shop, he was greeted by an elderly man who took one look at his glasses through his own and muttered, No, that will just not do." Warily, Harry asked, "What do you mean?" "Your spectacles, young sir," said the shopkeeper. "Poor quality muggle eyeglasses, not a single charm to be found." "Oh," replied Harry, "I take it that's a bad thing?" "Definitely," said the shopkeeper. He then pointed to what looked like a muggle dentist chair and said, "Go sit there, I want to have a look at your eyes." Still wary, Harry walked across the floor and took a seat in the chair. The old man followed him over. As soon as Harry was semi-reclined in the chair, the old man used his wand, pointed it at Harry's face and muttered, "Accio muggle spectacles." The glasses whipped off Harry's face into the old man's outstretched hand. Harry didn't even twitch in response before his glasses were gone from his face. Trying his best to focus on what the old shopkeeper was doing, he saw the old man use some sort of chart while looking through the lenses at it. Harry couldn't read the old man's face, but he heard him mutter and harumph a bit. Dropping the chart back onto a desk, he walked back to Harry and said, "Hold out your hand, palm up." Harry did as instructed, and the old man placed the glasses in Harry's hand. He was about to redeem them when the old man put his hand out and blocked him. "Not yet, young sir," he said gently. "Now I need to check your eyes to see how well your spectacles matched." He then waved his wand over Harry's eyes, a slight hesitation in the wand movement, and Harry heard a muttered, "For night," before the wand was moving again. Harry felt what he could only describe as a very slight itch in the back of his eyes until the man appeared to be done. "You can put your spectacles back on now, Mr. Potter," said the shopkeeper, before he muttered, "For all the good they do." Frowning, Harry donned his glasses and looked at the man. "I take it you had to remove my glamours to see my eyes properly?" he asked. "Yes," replied the shopkeeper without remorse. "But never fear, Mr. Potter, I will not speak of your visit to me today. I pride myself on my discretion," he said, before dropping the timbre of his voice. "Unlike, say, Garrick Ollivander. That man is always spouting off who his clients are and what their wands are made of. Utterly unprofessional. Now," he continued, back in a light manner, "the lenses in your glasses are a very poor match for your needs. I dare say you struggle to properly focus at longer distances, correct?" "Correct," replied Harry, "but I've learned to compensate."
"I dare say you have," said the man.
"However, you've come to the right place to acquire a pair or more better suited to your needs. Firstly," he said, "you can get up off that chair for the moment and take a wander with me amongst my shelves. Let's see if we can find a style or two you're partial to." Harry rose from his reclined position and followed the man across to where racks of various shapes, styles, and types of spectacle frames were housed. "Take a look around, Mr. Potter," he gestured, "and see if there's something that tweaks your fancy. While you do that, I'll get my folder covering the various charms you can have permanently cast on your new lenses and frames." Harry hadn't planned on getting new glasses, but that was only because he hadn't thought of it. Now that he was actually looking around in the shop, he found he was quite enthusiastic about the idea. He knew that he only had the ones he did because they came out of a second-hand bin at a local thrift shop in Surrey, not far from Little Whinging. Thinking a little, he thought he could get a pair for normal wear, a pair that looked more formal, read expensive, and a pair of sunglasses or something that would otherwise hide his distinctive eye color. Besides, unusual spectacles could help to mask his face. Harry only wore the aviator style he wore because that was what was given to him. Trying on a few different pairs of different shapes, he found he quite liked how a more flatter rectangle with rounded corners looked. He thought of those for more formal occasions with frameless lenses and silver fittings. Next, he found a more rugged pair of a similar shape with solid bronze frames. For sunglasses, he wanted something with a more ultra-modern feel. He turned to the shopkeeper and asked, "How much do you know of modern Muggle styles?" Unsurprised by the question, the shopkeeper replied with a small smile, "Reach out to the racks on which the spectacles are housed and give it a slight tug." Turning back to the rack, Harry reached out, grabbed onto the rack, and gave it a pull. The whole rack, plus the board behind it, pulled open like a cupboard door. Behind it, Harry found what he was looking for, a whole pile of new racks with spectacles. "Sweet!" exclaimed Harry. Behind the front rack, he found plenty of brand names from many popular to expensive brands. Pulling open other racks, he finally found a whole section covering sunglasses. His eyes were drawn to a pair that had a single, wraparound lens and were frameless except for the top edge and had black arms. To him, they looked like what he'd been told were Ray-Bans or something. He loved them at first sight. Taking them down off the rack, he turned back to the shopkeeper with a wide grin and said, "I love them." Smiling back, the shopkeeper said, "Excellent. And I hope if someone asks where you acquired them, except if they're a pure blood, you let them know they can come to me to acquire a pair of their own." "Yeah, I can do that," Harry said enthusiastically. "Excellent," said the shopkeeper. "Now, I take it you want all 3 pairs?" "Yes, please," replied Harry. "While I adjust these to match the needed corrections to your natural eyesight," he said, handing Harry a folder with brochures made of parchment. "I want you to skim through this and take note of what charms within it you'd like me to apply to your new spectacles." The old man walked out through a door marked "No Admittance," while Harry went back to the semi-reclined chair to rapidly skim through the folder. After 10 minutes, the man came back with the 3 pairs of glasses and asked, "Picked out what charms you want me to apply to these for you?" "Yes, thank you," replied Harry as he handed him the folder back. "Can you put on all 5 of the impervious, anti-fog, self-cleaning, anti-legilimency and anti-memory charms on them?" "I can," replied the old man, "but if you have the self-cleaning charm on them, you don't need the anti-fog charm. The self-cleaning charm will do the work of the anti-fog charm, so it becomes superfluous." Nodding, Harry said, "I can see that, yeah. Okay, then I'd like those 4 placed on them. Very well, Mr. Potter, replied the shopkeeper. Come back after lunch and I'll have your new spectacles ready for you. Getting back up, Harry said, That's great, thank you. How much do I owe you? I don't have the full tally yet, he replied. However, I suspect it will be in the range of, say, 80 galleons. Harry drew 90 galleons from his coin pouch and handed them to the old shopkeeper. Keep it, and just give me the change when I return this afternoon, he said when the man expressed his concern. It was too much. Back out of the shop, Harry continued building his mental map of Diagon Alley. He was just about to enter a dimmer and somewhat grummier side alley when an elderly witch tapped him on his shoulder. When Harry turned to see who had accosted him, the elderly witch kindly but sternly said, Do not go in there, young man. That's Nocturne Alley. I'm sure your parents would be most wroth with you if they learned you had entered that place. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean, replied Harry. What's so bad about it? Nocturne Alley is full of dark creatures, wizards and witches, and they generally only sell dark artifacts and the like, she said. It is not a place for a young one such as yourself. Harry gave a nod, thanked her for her concern, and skipped it. He'd wait until he had better control of his magic before venturing down that particular alley. Instead, he moved across the mouth of the alley and continued his mapping. Mapping Nocturne Alley would be left until he actually had a legitimate reason for entering. His next delay occurred at Flourish and Blots. After reading the short blurb on legilimency and memory charms, such as the Obliviate Curse, he wanted to learn more about that side of the mind arts. He prided himself on his eidetic memory, and the thought of someone messing with it outside of his own control somewhat frightened him. After a bit of advice from the bookstore shopkeeper's assistant, he purchased a general tome on the mind arts, an introduction to the mind arts, and one that focused specifically on occlumency and legilimency, protecting your mind and invading others. While there, he also acquired a book on formal writing within the British magical community, a formal guide to letter writing that he hoped would cover how to write to the heads of the allied houses regarding the alliances. He knew he had only a few weeks, at the most, before he wrote to them as his father requested. All 3 books were packaged and shrunk for him once he paid for them. Damn, thought Harry, even more studying to do and we're not even at school yet. His last stop before stopping for an early lunch was at Elop's Owl Emporium. Walking into the store, he felt as if he was being pulled or called to the rear of the shop, and there, just over head height, was the most beautiful bird he'd ever seen. A snowy owl. The owl just stared right back. Taking down the gilded cage in which the bird was housed, Harry took the cage to the front counter. You needs be careful with that owl, young sir, said the older sales clerk from behind the counter. She's a right nasty one, that one is. Thank you for your concern, sir, replied Harry quietly. However, I just have this strong feeling this bird is for me. Giving a shrug, the old shopkeeper said, They're your fingers. She's likely to bite off. She's got a real nasty bite on her. Giving a shrug right back, Harry said, Nevertheless, I'll take her. The shopkeeper then suggested Harry purchase some owl treats and a perch for her to hopefully convince her not to bite your fingers off, and gave him a pamphlet on the care of a personal owl. After paying for his purchase, Harry dropped the treats, shrunken perch and pamphlet into one of his pockets while he carried the cage outside. With his latest purchases, Harry crossed the alley and took table outside Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. He left the caged owl sitting on the small table. In there, he ordered a 3-scoop ice cream sundae and a coffee. Returning to his room in the leaky cauldron, Harry set his new pet owl, who he named Hedwig, up on her new perch near the window so she could enjoy the sunlight. Then he set to work reading the various texts he'd acquired, before he returned to the alley a couple hours later to pick up his new glasses. After the first 2 fun-filled days wandering about Diagon Alley and getting both his supplies and bearings, Harry then spent the next few weeks mainly hunkered down in his room studying. He had to assimilate quite a significant amount of information in a short space of time before he felt confident enough to start contacting people based on the request of his father. His only break was to return to the bank early on the morning of his 11th birthday, 31st July, to take up his head of house ring for the House of Potter and to read his parents' will. For the ring, it was only a simple matter of placing the ring on his right ring finger. The magic of the ring flashed before resizing itself, signifying he was the rightful head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter. Immediately afterwards, his parents' will was read. In it, it was confirmed who Harry's rightful guardians should have been, and still should be. He asked for the will to be executed, but stated that neither the Order of the Phoenix nor Albus Dumbledore should receive their bequeathments. He asked the goblins to file paperwork to that effect immediately, who would in turn file it with the ministry. He also asked for and received a certified copy of the will for his own possession, and the goblins partly reactivated the Potter vaults. After leaving the bank, he returned to the leaky cauldron to continue his studying. By Sunday, 4th August, Harry felt he was ready to start sending out his formal letters, re-establishing alliances with the various houses. His first was to the current regent for the noble and most ancient house of Longbottom, Madame Augusta Longbottom. He also knew the scion of the house was a boy the same age as he, Neville Francis Longbottom, and that there was only a single day between them in age. As soon as he finished writing that letter, using the best parchment and ink he could procure from scribulous ever-changing inks, he set to writing a similar letter to the regent for the noble and most ancient house of Bones, Madame Amelia Bones. As with Neville Longbottom, scion Longbottom, the heir presumptive for the house of Bones was someone his own age, Susan Bones. By the time he'd finished, Hedwig had returned, and he sent off his second letter. To both he introduced himself, as was required, and invited them to contact him for a meeting to formally re-establish the alliances. The prose was formal, as per tradition, so he knew the response would come in a similar fashion, and that it wouldn't be rushed. As they were both considered light families, he asked each for a meeting at their convenience in any location they desired. He hoped the sign of trust he gave, doing that, made the meetings that much easier, and that neither would be concerned when he was not accompanied by a guardian. He also asked for the meeting to occur near the end of the month, just before he left for Hogwarts, to stop them from making inquiries before he was able to confront Dumbledore. His own research into the Blacks, learned through gentle probing questions of shopkeepers within the alley, they were always the biggest gossip mongers and therefore the best source for information of the houses, led him to believe the headship of the noble and most ancient house of Black was currently vacant. The position rightfully belonged to Sirius Black. However, with Black in the wizarding prison, Azkaban, and Black unable to take the headship while he was incarcerated, it was believed Dumbledore had been acting in proxy for that house since the death of Arcturus Black a few months earlier. Harry had no intention of contacting Dumbledore. He had raised the matter with Bloodfang of the Goblins when he next visited. It was clear the old goblin knew some important information regarding the Blacks, and Sirius Black in particular, but was implacable in providing information claiming client confidentiality. What bothered Harry was why the goblin clammed up when asked about Black. He wondered why the goblins would refuse to divulge the identity of the head of House Black when that information was readily provided for the other houses. The fourth house, the Greengrasses, was still headed by Cygnus Greengrass, the same person who was responsible for the marriage contract between he and Scion Greengrass, Daphne Greengrass, heiress presumptive to the noble and most ancient house. That letter would take time to write, as it required to be one combining both the re-establishment of the alliance between Potter and Greengrass and introducing himself to the father of Daphne. The books he had procured were adamant in their instruction he not contact the girl directly until they had been formally introduced. Speculation held that the Greengrasses were considered a grey and neutral house, so it behooved Harry to take care in contacting them. A neutral ground for the first meeting would be considered prudent. However, the betrothal contract made such a choice moot, and indicated the meeting should occur at his preferred location as the betrothed groom. However, as he did not currently have a place to call his own, he would give the Greengrasses the hometown advantage, and hoped, just as with the Boneses and Longbottoms, it showed he was giving them his trust. Before sending the letter to the Greengrasses, though, Harry intended to speak to both Mesdames Longbottom and Bones to get their views on how he should proceed. He felt asking for their advice and probably acting upon it would help cement the newly re-established alliances with those two houses. If he wasn't already old friends with his ongoing headache, the politics of the situation would give him another. In the meantime, he kept reading and learning as much as he could about the wizarding world. At precisely 6:00 p.m. on the 26th August, the fireplace flashed to light with green flames. Stumbling out to land on his butt was Harry Potter. He wore formal robes without crest of a dark, almost black-green silk. His underrobe shirt was of an emerald green to match his eyes. A young boy of similar age with sandy-colored hair and wearing his own formal robes of deep red stepped forward with a grin and helped Harry back to his feet. "Thank you," said Harry with a sheepish grin of his own. "I'm not used to flow travel." "It can take some getting used to," the sandy-haired lad replied, before stepping back and, in a formal voice, saying, "I, Neville Francis Longbottom, heir Longbottom, formally welcome you to Longbottom Hall and offer to you our hospitality this evening." Harry, recognizing the formal phrasing from his reading of the Wizarding World etiquette, replied, "I, Harry James Potter, heir Potter, thank you for and accept your welcome and offer of hospitality, heir Longbottom." Reaching into his robes, he brought forth a small gift-wrapped package and, offering it, said, "I offer you this gift as per the old ways." Accepting the gift, Neville replied, "I accept and thank you for your gift, Harry Potter." Letting go with a relieved sigh, Neville said with a grin, "Thank Merlin, that's done with. You can call me Neville, by the way," and offered his hand. Harry shook the boy's hand with a wide grin of his own and said, "Call me Harry, please." Standing a little straighter again, Neville said, "I'm now to escort you to the sitting room where Madam Dowager Lady Longbottom awaits us." Giving a nod, Harry said, "Then by all means, please lead us." Neville led Harry into the entrance hall of the hall, across and through another door. In there he was greeted by a witch appearing in her middle ages, for a muggle but in her 70s, for a witch. He formally greeted her before she gestured to a seat opposite a coffee table. He waited until she took seat before he sat down. Neville sat on the same side as his gran but a little apart. "Now that the formalities are out of the way," she began, "how have you been, Mr. Potter?" "It's just Harry, please, ma'am," replied Harry. "After all, you're the grandmother of my godbrother Neville, and I've been well." Neville, a little startled, blurted, "Godbrother?" "Neville," Madam Longbottom scolded. Neville looked a little abashed at the scolding. "Yeah, Neville," said Harry, to quickly skip over the uncomfortableness of the situation. "Your mother is my godmother, and from what I can gather, my mother was your godmother. As far as I can see, that makes us godbrothers, brothers in all but blood." "He is correct, Neville," said Madam Longbottom. "Both your parents were close and became even closer when dear Alice and Lily both fell pregnant at the same time." Turning back to Harry, she said, "And I'm very sorry for your loss, Harry. I loved your parents as if they were my own children." "Thank you, ma'am," said Harry with a little sorrow. "I appreciate your sentiments." Giving only a nod in response, and with a slight hesitation before continuing, Madam Longbottom then said, "And, as you are Neville's godbrother, as you put it, perhaps you might find it within yourself to refer to me as Neville does, as Gran." A little startled, Harry was a little hesitant before replying, "Thank you, I think I'd like that, Gran," and gave a small smile. "Good," she replied. "Now perhaps you can tell us where you've been for the past 10 years. With a small sigh, and not a little weariness, Harry decided to tell them both a rough, abridged version of his life. He kept secrets, of course, but he gave them some detail. He just didn't know how much to tell them yet, so decided to withhold some information. Halfway through the telling of his biography, a house elf popped in and reported dinner was ready. Harry continued his story after it was finished, and they were once more sitting in the sitting room. Madam Longbottom was drinking a sherry, while Neville and Harry were drinking butterbeers. While he was reticent to do so, Harry felt it would be an overt sign of trust to show the letter from his father to the Dowager Lady. So he offered it and allowed her to read it. He was surprised to hear the prime and proper witch muttering quite sulphurously about what she had read. "It appears, Mr. Potter," she said, returning the letter, once she'd calmed down a bit, "that you should have been raised here at Longbottom Hall." Surprised, Harry asked, "Pardon? I was led to believe Uncle Frank and Aunt Alice are currently incapable of caring for me." Realizing what he'd said, he apologized. "Sorry, that was rather abrupt of me." With an expression of slight pain, she said, "Not your fault, dear, but I think I should explain." Harry gave a small nod and gesture for her to continue. "You see, your parents and you were attacked on 31st October, she explained. Frank and dear Alice were not attacked until almost a week later on 5th November. Harry nodded in understanding. "However," she went on, "according to what you've told me, you were placed with those Muggle relatives of yours on the evening of 1st November by Albus Dumbledore. That was 4 days before Frank and Alice were attacked." With comprehension dawning, Harry said, "That means I should have been here, at Longbottom Hall, instead of with the Dursleys, when Uncle Frank and Aunt Alice were attacked." "Yes, dear," she replied. "Please forgive me for asking, but could it have been that Uncle Frank and Aunt Alice rejected me because they too were at risk of being attacked? Maybe they thought I'd be safer if I wasn't with them." Shaking her head, she replied with a frown, "No, they'd have never done that. If, as this letter suggests, Frank and dear Alice were listed as the first option for your care when, if something untoward happened to your parents, then they would not have turned you away." With a sigh, Harry growled, "Dumbledore? He completely ignored my parents' wishes. That man I find more and more to blame for what happened to me under the oh-so-tender mercies of the Dursleys. What I cannot figure out is why he did it." "That I cannot tell you," she replied. Straightening himself up a bit, Harry said, "Anyway, that's something I intend to ask him directly when I finally meet him. In the meantime, I wonder if you can offer any advice about how to deal with the greengrasses and the betrothal contract between myself and Lady Daphne." After a short discussion on how to handle the situation, she offered Longbottom Hall as a neutral venue. However, he declined the offer but accepted her advice. Her advice thankfully matched his already recently established views. At the end of the night, Harry was pleased he had met one of his father's requests to re-establish the alliance with House Longbottom, and he had answers to some of the questions of which he'd been plagued over the past month. He also agreed to meet up with Neville on the train to Hogwarts the next Sunday morning. "I will, of course, probably be sitting with Lady Daphne at least," said Harry. "She is, after all, my betrothed. I hope this will not be of concern to you." "Nope," said Neville. "I've met Daphne. I like her. She'll also probably want to be with her friend Tracy, and I have no problem with her either." The next evening, again at precisely 6:00 p.m., the fireplace flashed to light with green flames. Stumbling out and again landing on his butt in the parlour of Bones Manor was Harry Potter. Again he wore formal robes, without crest. The colour this time was plain black. His underrobe shirt was of a light green. Susan Bones awaited him, just as Neville had done the previous day. A quick run through the same greetings and responses after she'd stopped giggling at him, and she was escorting him through to a formal lounge to meet her aunt, Madame Amelia Bones, current regent for House Bones. Harry found Madame Bones to be a no-nonsense kind of woman, very similar to Madame Longbottom. However, where Madame Longbottom was more a regal grand lady, Madame Bones was more down-to-earth, more of a beer and pretzels rather than tea and scones kind of woman. Harry was surprised just how similar the two meetings were. Though what he had read did not go into too great a detail about the intricacies of such meetings, he felt he shouldn't have been surprised. The biggest difference, though, was the penetrating questions Madame Bones asked him about his past. Whenever he was reticent to reveal too much, he knew the older witch, the head of the DMLE, knew he was withholding the information. At such times she approached the matter from a slightly different angle, a slightly different perspective. By the end of the meeting, Harry was surprised about just how much he had divulged. He could also tell the older witch was trying not to give off the impression of great anger. Clearly, she was not happy with what she had learned from what Harry told her. However, on such occasions, she kept her own counsel. As he did with Madame Longbottom, Harry offered the letter from his father to the witch and asked her for advice on how to proceed with his meeting with the greengrasses. Her advice matched Madame Longbottom's. As with the Longbottoms, at the end of the night he was pleased to have re-established the second of the alliances with which his father had charged him, and also agreed to meet with young Susan on the train to Hogwarts. He also mentioned sitting with Neville and likely Daphne and her friend Tracy, and Susan mentioned her friend Hannah would also likely join them. Harry's meeting with the Greengrasses was scheduled for 5:00 p.m. on the Thursday night prior to departure on the Hogwarts Express. This time he wore a set of formal robes in iridescent dark green with a white undershirt. He took special care with his appearance, with the only slight to his appearance being his untamable messy black hair. He also wore his rimless glasses as they enhanced his eyes. Stepping into the fireplace at the Leaky Cauldron, he stepped out into the marble-floored parlour at Greengrass Estate and promptly fell onto his butt, yet again. Muttering to himself about his innate clumsiness and forcing back his anger, he rose to his feet to be greeted by a stunningly dressed middle-aged witch who was gently smiling at him. "Sorry," he muttered louder, brushing himself off. "I hate flu travel." Smiling more openly at his remarks, the witch waited for him to brush himself down a bit before stepping forward and saying, "Allow me." She brought forth her wand and, with a few quick gestures and a murmured incantation, banished all the remaining soot from his robes. Then she stepped back, resheathed her wand and said, "Welcome to Greengrass Manor, Mr. Potter. I am Lady Isabel Greengrass. On behalf of my husband and myself, I offer you welcome and our hospitality this evening." Straightening himself up, Harry thought, a slightly less than formal welcome. "I guess I wing it," he replied. "Thank you for your invitation and welcome, Lady Greengrass." He reached into his robes and drew forth a small wrapped gift. Offering it to her, he said, "Please accept this small token in response to your generosity." Smiling, she stepped forward and accepted the gift before dropping it into a pocket of her robes. She turned around slightly and took his elbow before saying, "Nicely done, Mr. Potter. Perhaps you can now do me the honor of escorting me to the lounge. My Lord Greengrass awaits us there." With a slight bow, Harry replied, "Of course, ma'am," and allowed her to steer him out of the room and through to the lounge. As they were walking, she leaned down and whispered to him, "Have no fear, Harry. We're all family here." On hearing her words, Harry visibly relaxed and let out the breath he didn't realize he was holding with a sigh. Entering the formal lounge, he saw a tall man rise from an armchair and turn towards him. Lady Greengrass said, "My lord, I present Mr. Harry Potter, head of the noble and most ancient house of Potter." Turning to Harry and stepping away a little, she said, "Mr. Potter, I present Lord Segnus Greengrass, head of the noble and most ancient house of Greengrass." Harry, recognizing his cue, walked forward and offered his hand to Lord Greengrass. "Thank you for your invitation for this evening, Lord Greengrass." With a small smile, the older man said, "And thank you for accepting our invitation, Mr. Potter." He then indicated an armchair across from where he was sitting and said, "Please, sit." Harry moved around and sat on the offered armchair and sat back, hoping he looked quite relaxed as he did so, even though he wasn't. He waited for the Greengrasses to find their own seats across from him. He hesitated before saying, "I must apologize for not being in contact with you sooner. However, I have been kept from my heritage and the wizarding world in general these past 10 years. I only rediscovered the wizarding world at the end of July and have been working hard to learn everything I need to gain a better understanding of this world. That led me to discover a letter from my father awaiting me in a vault in Gringotts." He reached into his robes and withdrew the letter from his father. He offered it across to the man opposite. "It is a personal letter," he continued, "but I hope it goes some way to allow you to understand my delay in contacting you." Frowning, Lord Greengrass glanced back at Harry for a moment before opening the letter and reading. When he was finished, he offered the letter back and said, "Thank you for allowing me to read such a personal letter, Mr. Potter. It does explain some matters. However, we have attempted to contact you on numerous occasions over the past 10 years to at the very least ensure ourselves you're still all right. But every owl has been unable to track you down, and the mail has returned to us unopened." Having heard the unasked question, Harry sighed a bit and said, "For whatever reason I do not yet understand, Albus Dumbledore saw fit to place me in the home of my Muggle relatives immediately after the events of 31st October 1981. Until I received my letter informing me I had been accepted into the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry on 24th July, I was unaware of my heritage." The Hogwarts letter was the first time I had received any contact from the wizarding world. I have no idea why any correspondence, other than my Hogwarts letter sent to me by people in the wizarding world, has not found me. I am as upset with the situation, if not more so than you are. Since the day I received my Hogwarts letter, I have been scrambling, for want of a better word, to learn everything I can about both my heritage and my place in this world. As you would understand, it's been a bit of a shock. Clearly surprised, Lady Greengrass asked, "No other mail? What about your bank statements from Gringotts?" "Nothing, I'm afraid," replied Harry. "I can only surmise Dumbledore did not want me aware of the wizarding world until I was of age to enter Hogwarts. I think it's because he didn't want me to grow up being famous. Maybe he thought if I did, I'd grow up to be arrogant or something. It will be the leading issue I raise with him when I meet him." "It's illegal to intercept Gringotts' mail," exclaimed Lady Greengrass. "So they've informed me," replied Harry with a frown. "However, as he's claimed he's my magical guardian through your parliament, the Wizengamot, he's used that position to stop me getting my mail, and there's little I can do about it. What I have done is, with the help of the goblins, created an alias under the name Harrison Smith for purposes of receiving mail. It's not so much a fake identity as a way to bypass whatever Dumbledore's done to block my mail for a select few. And explains why you asked us to write to Harrison Smith with our response to your letter," mused Lord Greengrass. "And also explains why no one's seen hide nor hair of you since that night 10 years ago." "Yes, sir," said Harry. "And people wonder why we don't ally ourselves with the light," mused the older man. Turning to his wife, he said, "Perhaps you should go and speak of this with our oldest before bringing her in here to meet her betrothed. It may placate her somewhat." Lady Greengrass smiled back before replying, "I believe that would be the wisest course of action." Turning to Harry, she rose, as did Harry, before saying, "If you will excuse me, Mr. Potter." "Of course, ma'am," he replied with a slight bow. As the older woman left the room, Harry retook his seat. When he was once more seated, Lord Greengrass said, "I suppose this meeting is also about our alliance with the House of Potter." "Yes, sir," replied Harry. "I am still learning my place in the wizarding world and what it means to be light, dark, and neutral. However, as the letter from my father clearly states, an alliance between our two houses is something he was keen on my renewing. I do not know enough not to acquiesce to his request. Plus, I figured with the betrothal contract, it became a moot point anyway." "Quite," smiled the older man. Hesitating a moment, Harry said, "I know very little about my parents, sir. I've heard some from Mesdom's Longbottom and Bones, but I believe they were not part of my parents' inner circle of friends. I was hoping, as it appears you and Lady Greengrass were in that circle, you could help me to understand my parents better." With a look of understanding, Lord Greengrass sighed and said, "I first met your father and mother when we were at Hogwarts. Your father was already friends with 3 other boys, Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew. Your mother and Isabel became friends in 3rd year when they took arithmancy together. Your father and the other 3 were all sorted into Gryffindor. I was sorted into Slytherin, and your mother and Isabel were sorted into Ravenclaw. Your father, Black, Lupin, and Pettigrew were a tight-knit group that quickly made a name for themselves as pranksters. Actually, it was more like your father, Black, and Lupin were a tight-knit group, with Pettigrew always hanging around them. The 4 of them called themselves the Marauders, and they kind of wreaked havoc amongst the student population and staff with their pranks. However, there were some of us that quickly deduced that besides the staff, their pranks were aimed at the Dark families and those whose parents were probably Death Eaters. Students, such as myself, were also the victims of their pranks, but only because I was a Slytherin and their prank was aimed at our house in general. There were some who always seemed to be an individually targeted victim. Severus Snape, the current potions master at Hogwarts, was always one such victim, as were Bulstrode, Avery, the Lestrange brothers, Rosier, and the other Blacks. It became very apparent they were almost exclusively targeting those they perceived as being future Death Eaters. On graduation, we learned that your mother, Lily Evans, was a secret 5th member of the Marauders in their final year. She and Lupin were the brains behind some of the best and biggest pranks Hogwarts have ever known. He smiled in reminiscence. Because it was a time of war, many of us left school to immediately join the Auror Corps. In our year, there were your father, myself, Sirius Black, Edgar Bones, Frank and Alice Longbottom, Gideon and Fabian Prewett, and quite a few others. However, it was us 8 for whom Black coined the term the Auror Marauders. Though we were supposed to be in training, we spent quite a bit of time pranking the existing Auror Corps and the training staff. It was during that time I became very good friends with both of your parents, as well as the others. That friendship continued into our Auror career once we completed training. And that leads us to the evening of 1st August 1980, he said, shifting forward in his chair slightly. Young Neville Longbottom was born to Frank and Alice late on the night of 30th July. Then you were born during the early hours of 31st July. My daughter Daphne was born in early June, so was only a few weeks old at this stage. Your father invited the male members of the Auror Marauders to the cottage in Godric's Hollow to wet the baby's head, so to speak. That's new father code for get blind drunk in celebration. Of course, this was also the first time we were able to wet the baby's head for Daphne, so I was getting just as drunk and rowdy as the rest. I don't know when it happened, but it was very late at night. As it was explained to me by one of the Prewett brothers later, someone, I think it was Black, got it into their head that Daphne and you were the best-looking babies ever, and that you needed to be protected from undesirables who'd only be after you because of your looks and the power you would wield in the future, and as such, to protect you both, a betrothal contract between the two of you should be written up immediately. Someone found a book that had the text of standard contracts, and again I think it was Black who found it, or more than likely had it with him for this, and Gideon, I think it was, who quickly wrote up the contract. With a sigh, he said, "Kane, someone had a blood quill, probably Black again, so both your father and I signed the damned thing using the quill. It wasn't until the next morning, James, your father and I woke up to find we'd betrothed you and my daughter to be married when you came of age or were otherwise emancipated. By then, Black had already disappeared again into hiding as the Potter's secret keeper, and your father and I had to face the music with our wives at St. Mungo's that afternoon. Yes, and I made you sleep on the couch for the rest of the month as part penance," said a voice from the doorway. Harry turned in his chair and saw Lady Greengrass had just stepped through the door with a blonde-haired girl with bright blue eyes standing alongside her. The girl was alternatively glaring at Lord Greengrass and Harry. This must be Daphne, thought Harry. And Dad was right. She is a beauty. Both men rose from their seats as the two ladies came forward. "Ah," said Lord Greengrass, as an aside to Harry. With a gesture towards the girl, he said, "I present to you, Mr. Potter, my daughter Daphne Ophelia Greengrass, your betrothed." Daphne just glared at him as if attempting to kill him with her eyes. Dinner with the Greengrasses then became a much more relaxed affair except for the death glares Lord Greengrass was getting from his oldest daughter. His youngest, though, Astoria, a 9-year-old brunette with the same startling blue eyes, was having a great time twigging her sister about how lucky she was to be marrying the boy who lived, and how she must be ever so pleased Harry was such a good-looking boy, plus others. Lady Greengrass, or Isabel as he was invited to call the lady, appeared quite amused by her youngest's antics, but Lord Greengrass appeared to wince on occasion by some of the more outrageous things the young girl said. Harry quickly worked out that Lord Greengrass, Cygnus, was clearly under orders not to say anything in response and take whatever was said as yet more part payment for the betrothal contract. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or be horrified by some of the things the young girl said. Instead, he decided Cygnus was on his own and hunkered down in his chair, hoping to not draw attention to himself. It wasn't until young Astoria, Tory, sweetly asked her father when he was going to arrange a betrothal contract for her and some bloke named Cedric Diggory, because he was dreamy, that Isabel finally stepped in and called a halt to it. Harry almost laughed out loud when he saw the look of gratitude on Cygnus's face when he looked at his wife. He could not, however, stop the slight snort of amusement that escaped his lips, and that started Daphne in on him. Clearly, the girl had been bottling up her anger at the situation, and she had decided to unload her ire on Harry. "You might think this is funny, Harry James Potter, but I don't," she snipped. No modern family uses betrothal contracts these days, and I'm not pleased I'm subjected to one forcing me to marry you." "Peace, my lady," replied Harry softly with raised hands. "It appears I'm as much the victim of a prank carried out in August 1980 by Sirius Black as you. I assure you the man is lucky he's currently incarcerated in Azkaban and out of my personal reach." Not knowing how to respond, she just glared back. Harry thought, hopefully I've headed that particular rant off. He also noticed Cygnus make a small gesture with his wine goblet as if offering him a toast of congratulations. "So," she asked with a lower venomous voice, obviously changing tactics, "am I that repulsive?" No, not at all," replied Harry. "I'm more worried we'd be introduced as Lady Potter and her husband, that Harry bloke, or that I'd be completely ignored, lost in the shadows of your radiant beauty." That stunned the table until Astoria piped up and said, "Oh, he's good," before turning to her sister and saying, "If you don't want him, Daffy, I'll take him. I wouldn't mind being Lady Potter if he's going to say things like that." That elicited an unladylike snort from Isabel and a grin from Cygnus. Though her cheeks pinked a bit, Daphne just huffed, ignored everyone, and proceeded to assassinate her roast potatoes with her flatware. "Round one to the future Lord Potter, methinks," muttered Isabel to her husband. Harry was glad of the time he'd run out of reading material and borrowed a couple of his aunt's penny dreadful romance novellas to read until he could get more books. Over dessert, talk turned to which houses Harry and Daphne thought they might be sorted into. Daphne thought she might be in Slytherin or Ravenclaw, while Harry thought Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff. When Isabel asked why those two houses, Harry replied, "I think I'm smart enough to make my way in Ravenclaw, plus I've heard they have their own library in their common room that I would love to have access to. And I know that Hufflepuff House gets a bad rep, but I've no problem with being considered a hard worker and loyal to friends and family. Though my father and his friends were in Gryffindor, I don't want to be there just because it's expected of me. Besides, I don't really consider myself all that brave. At least, I don't consider bravery as a defining feature over my other qualities. That would make me seem all brawn and no brain. And I'm not interested in Slytherin because, while I consider myself to be somewhat cunning, and I may be able to carry off Gale if I worked at it, I don't think I'm all that ambitious. Unless you consider growing up to be a good father and husband and a self-responsible man to be an ambition." "How about you, Daphne?" he asked. "Unlike you, I think I'd manage to carry off cunning and guile quite well, and I'm certainly ambitious," she replied before lowering her head and the timbre of her voice with sadness. "However, it's rather pointless for me to be ambitious now, isn't it?" Startled by how dejected she sounded, Harry said, "You can be as ambitious as you want, Daphne. Irrespective of my earlier words, I'm not adverse to being married to the upcoming Minister of Magic, the head of St. Mungo's, or the leading world-renowned potions mistress, Lady Daphne Potter, or whatever it is you wish to do. I hope you're willing to be at least my equal, if not surpass me. I can be just as happy being happy with your successes as with my own." Daphne's head shot up on hearing that and stared straight at Harry in shock. "You do?" she asked in a quiet voice, with eyes becoming moist with tears. "Definitely," he firmly replied. She started before suddenly pushing her chair back and mumbling, "Excuse me," and dashing out of the room. Looking at Harry with what he considered to be no small measure of respect, Isabel said, "And excuse me, Mr. Potter, I need to go and check on a few things." She too pushed her chair away from the table and left the room, following after her daughter. Cygnus smiled at Harry and said, "You're going to have to stop that, Mr. Potter. You're making me look bad by my not being as considerate as you are showing yourself to be." Harry blushed and said, "I just don't like the idea she would see a marriage between us as being a burden or disappointment in her life. I may not know her yet, but that's irrelevant to me. Everyone has the right to be happy with their life, and I cannot countenance being the cause of someone's misery. I hope that maybe the ladies of your house will come to view the betrothal contract as you showing great foresight towards your eldest daughter's happiness." Cygnus snorted in response and said, "Are you sure you're not going to be sorted into Slytherin? You're definitely showing the diplomatic traits required to succeed in that house." Harry just shrugged. A turn-of-the-century French poet and essayist Charles Péguy once said, He who does not bellow the truth when he knows the truth makes himself the accomplice of liars and forgers. I do not wish to be offensive, but I have no desire for the politicking that appears prevalent in the House of the Snakes in this current climate. Noted, the older man said with a grin. Then turning to Astoria, he said, "As for you, young lady, it's time for bed." "Oh," she pouted. "But I want to hear Harry say something nice to me." Harry smiled at her and said, "Fair maiden, there are no words I can convey to you that would do justice to your own beauty. That's why I was hesitant to attempt to do so." Cygnus snorted, while Astoria sat there for a few seconds with a look partway between awe and being gobsmacked. She then turned to her father and begged, "I meant what I said. If Daffy doesn't want him, can I keep him?" Cygnus kindly said back, "After tonight, I don't think Daphne will be willing to let him go. Now off to bed." With a bit of a sulk, Astoria hopped off her chair and walked around to give her father a hug and kiss goodnight. Hesitating a moment, she then rushed to Harry and gave him one too. "Good night," she blurted, before blushing, giggling, and dashing from the room. "Well, you appear to have won over my 3 ladies," said Cygnus. "I wonder what your next trick will be. Shall we retire to the lounge to continue our discussion?" "Of course, Cygnus," replied Harry. Rising from the table, both man and boy headed for the lounge and were met there by Isabel. Once again taking seat, Harry started by saying, "I hope you do not feel it too forward of me to ask if I may be allowed to court your daughter starting tomorrow afternoon. I'd like to try and get some of the awkwardness of the situation between Daphne and I out of the way before we depart for Hogwarts." "It won't be courting, Harry," replied Cygnus. "After all, you're already betrothed. However, we're happy for you to come visiting tomorrow." Giving a slight shrug, Harry said, "I understand it's not actual courting. I just don't want to deny either of us the experience of courting one another. Plus, it'll give us both a chance to get to know one another in a one-on-one situation. I'm hoping that we can talk things through and allow the relationship to develop that way. I think it would be nice if we started as friends first." Nodding, Isabel said, "That's quite considerate of you, Harry, and I, for one, agree. If you had not been shunted off to your Muggle relatives, I dare say you and Daphne would have become much more familiar with one another before now." Leaning forward, Cygnus said, "As we both are being a little forward amongst friends, may I inquire as to where you're currently staying? I mean to say, if it's with your Muggle relatives, you may find it easier to reside here until Sunday." Hesitating a little before replying, Harry said, "I'm staying at the Leaky Cauldron. I have no wish to return to my Muggle relatives' tender mercies." Harry let a little anger colour his thoughts and must have let slip in his tone what he felt about the Dursleys, because Isabel leaned forward and asked, "Harry, are you ill-treated there?" Harry was a little uncomfortable with the question, but replied with a frown, "What's done is done. They don't want me and I don't want them anywhere near me again." It was clear neither Cygnus nor Isabel were happy with Harry's response, but they didn't push. Instead, Cygnus said in a lighter tone, "Well, we cannot have the head of a noble and most ancient house residing at the Leaky Cauldron. As you and Daphne, as you suggested, should get to know each other before you depart on the Hogwarts Express, then I think I must insist you move in here for the next few days into one of our guest rooms. After all, you will be family soon enough." Nodding, Harry said, "Then I thank you for the offer of your extended hospitality and heartily accept. I hope you won't mind if I move my things in tomorrow afternoon after lunch." "That would be fine, Harry. I'll have the elves prepare a room for you. Shall we expect you at, say, 1? "Thank you," said Harry. "That time suits me perfectly."